and we're having this spontaneous live stream to talk about some recent, very exciting, somewhat surprising news that just came from Number 10 about a UK general election that was just called for July 4th. So I'm joined by Marcus Ashworth, Therese Raphael, and Matthew Brooker, three columnists here with me in London to help make sense of what just happened. Matthew, can you kick us off? Because I know you've been watching very closely. Can you just walk us through what we just saw with Rishi Sunak outside of Number 10?
Well, yes, I mean, the whole of London, probably the whole of the UK has been in a ferment through today because of the rumours flying around that they were going to call an election for July the 4th, for the summer. And, you know, there have been, this has happened several times before, but there seemed to be different quality to it today because no spokesman for the government were pushing back on it. So Sunak finally stood up in front of 10 Downing Street and said, yes, we're going to hold it on July the 4th. And that's where we are. We've had a long time through the day waiting for it. And we finally had the announcement. It seemed his presentation took place. I think it started raining while he was speaking, which was kind of interesting. I think that, you know, they didn't think of putting in some kind of cover in there, or even just having somebody stand there with an umbrella. I mean, if you're going to present an image of being the person that's in control and ready to steer the country into the next phase, then I don't think that was a great way to present that.
Not the best image. What do you, Marcus and Therese, make of what we just saw?
Therese, after you.
Well, I think it's been something of a parlor game for weeks and months, kind of when this election would be, and even at Prime Minister's questions today, when asked, Sunak simply said, spoiler alert, it's going to happen in the second half of the year. But I think it did take a lot of analysts by surprise, because the assumption was he wanted to wait and to give the economy a chance to improve. He wanted to wait to get the Rwanda scheme off the ground, to get the first plane load of what they call illegal migrants returned. And, you don't become prime minister to sort of give up that bully pulpit. And so I think there was also an assumption that he would hold on as long as possible. And the fact that he's decided to go this summer, I think, suggests that the government believes that they've sort of run out of road here, that there is not that much to play for, and that maybe there's a hope of sort of stemming some of the bleeding. And they've lost I think around 100 Tory MPs have already said they won't stand at the next election. We've had a couple that have actually crossed to the opposition benches. And, the constant stream of rumor that it's, they're struggling to get things done, that the, morale is low. And I think that does wear on a government over time. And, perhaps there was a sense that going early, couldn't hurt, may not help, but wouldn't hurt, and that there wasn't going to be so much in the next few months that was going to really change the narrative significantly. I don't know, Marcus, what do you think?
Well, I just think it's a sign of evident desperation, which is that there is nothing left. And the school of thought that if you leave it to the end, which I absolutely thought they would do. So I'm 0 for 2, by the way. I thought Holmes Yusuf would stay on and would hang out and would try and somehow keep himself as a Scottish First Minister. Got that one properly wrong. I'm now again. I cannot see any logic why you would call an election now when they are going to lose. Sure, but maybe there was 1 or 2 or 3 things that they could pull out a rabbit out of the hat and go in November. I thought they would go after Trump Biden election, in the sense that whatever. If just imagine Trump won, the coalition, would be disastrous, and then would have this sort of don't vote for, disaster and mayhem, vote for the devil, so to speak, the continuity, as in middle November. But really, if they're going now, it just tells me there is absolutely nothing left. They understand. And there was a lovely thing about Sue Gray, who's now the chief of staff of just her excuse my expression, SH1T list, but basically 6 or 7 things which are going to go wrong. They're not going to get better. So the point here is that if you carry on, it's going to get better. Will you get inflation? Will you get interest rate cuts down? All this sort of good stuff. Will the economy pick up? And the brutal reality is no. They can absolutely see that nothing is going to get better. To go now, and this is damage limitation. We are talking about an opposition strategy of defence. They are talking about keeping the losses of Tory MPs to somewhere around 200. We're going to reverse the number of MPs. 5 Tory, 200 Labour. The exact opposite is what's going to in the next Parliament. And if the Tory MPs keep 200, that will be a miracle.
Up, or is it a gamble? Because I think can't a lot still happen between now and it's supposed to be January 2025, which is the absolute deadline for calling an election or for having an election. Isn't there a lot that can change?
Well, I think the problem with doing that is that you end up looking like you've been forced. There's enough of a window now that it can still look like a choice. I think the optics of that are still that you project some sense of control, don't you? I mean, but I do agree with Marcus. I think this is all like a function of low expectations, of essentially having given up. That there's nothing. I mean, there are things that could get better in the next 6 months, but not significantly enough to actually change the result. And you have there's just coming a glimmer of slightly positive things, like the inflation figures today being not abating, not easing as much as they'd hope, but yes, I mean it's a little bit. It really does look like clutching at straws. It's like, yes, we don't think we're going to win, but this is looks like a slightly better window than we might have in the future.
Yeah, I think they'd like to tell a positive economic story. They can just about say, well, the IMF upgraded its latest forecast, from 0.5% to 0.7% GDP growth. But, I think the 2025 forecast is still on track to be about 1.5%. That's just not good enough for an economy that has so many needs in terms of investment in infrastructure and in public services, and where business investment has been low for so long. So, I think if they had pushed it to the autumn, the other big thing that, perhaps it's bigger than the election, is the, autumn budget statement. Because if we remember Hunt, he pushed a lot of the really big decisions into the autumn budget statement. And, what we heard from the IMF and what we know from, the Institute for Fiscal Studies and others is that for the numbers to add up, there are going to have to be some pretty big cuts in some departments. So we know that healthcare and defense are pretty much ring-fenced, but there are other public services that are going to have to be cut. So, does this government want to make those choices, or would they like to punt it to Labour and have them come in facing, a pretty dismal picture and not having a lot of money to work with?
Can I just say, I think this is exactly why the blood inquiry and the massive bill from that, and we can see the post office things are coming. This is all about an opposition strategy from the Tories. They know they're going to lose. They're going to lose badly. It's a question of how they lose. They do not want to be, or they're trying not to be Gordon Brown here, in the sense that hang on to the end, to the very, very end, and getting eviscerated. So this is about how many MPs above or below 200 the Tories get. This is going to be a substantial landslide to Labour. Everyone knows it, everyone expects it, pretty much everyone actually wants it, even Tories. And we just clear it out, 14 years, wipe the slate and see what happens next. But, have some semblance of a party and a grip behind it. They are handing across a lot of problems to the next government. Why do it in November or December when it's going to be worse? There's clearly not much to say. They just had an extra 10 billion bill from the blood inquiry. It's time to exit with as little grace as you have. and say, please vote for us in 5 years' time.
Yeah, that's quite a different message than the one Rishi Sunak just gave at the lectern just now. So I am wondering though, so we had inflation figures today. Are there other achievements that Sunak is pointing to convince voters to, stay with the Tories, to give them the chance to maintain the progress they've made, as opposed to handing it over to Labour, who Rishi Sunak said today, has no plan, no policies in place?
Well, I think he's got two messages that he's hoping will land in some form. And one of them is, we have stabilized the ship, which is a sort of nod to the turmoil under Liz Truss. We are on the right track. These things take time. Inflation is coming down. Cost of living expenses are coming down. We have a plan for the NHS, for the small boats, for housing. We have a plan. Just stick with us. It's all going in the right direction. And Rishi Sunak can say, personally, he hasn't had that much time to really turn a ship this big around. And then I think the other message is the fear one, which tends to work with this sort of, neuroscience of the conservative voter responds to fear more than, positive messages. And that one says, something like, the world is a very dangerous place. Look at what, is happening in Ukraine. Look at what's happening in Gaza. Look at, the threat from China. Do you really want to take a risk on, these guys? They've been out of power for a long time. Yes, they've changed their colors, but, can we really trust them? Stick with the Tories and we will keep Britain secure. We'll invest more in defense. They won't do what they say. So I think those two messages sort of, we're on track and, don't trust what you're hearing from the other side is where they're going to try to go. I don't know if it will work. I suspect not with many voters, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, also being very personal about Starmer as well. I mean, he was, I thought, we're seeing the outlines here of his what his line of attack is going to be during the election campaign, which is to say that, this guy, you don't know what he stands for. He doesn't know what he stands for. How can you trust somebody who can't tell you what, who can't tell you what they want to do and stick to it? I mean, it seems desperate, but to me. But,
well, I think that lands with voters, but maybe not as much as changing 14 years of Tory rule lands with voters.
But Matthew, this is the whole point of the blood inquiry, of the whole post office stuff. It's about pinning the blob, if you need to call it, as in the civil service, the whole sludge of the ineffectuality of the NHS and the rest of it, on the type of people that Starmer represents. That's the Tory stick. Whether or not that cuts through, who knows? To my mind, it's all about whether you get the Tory vote out. As in, do people just go, I don't care for the Tory party, I don't care for the Labour party, I don't care for anyone, I'm just not going to vote. And that's the biggest risk to Rishi.
Yeah.
And he obviously calculated, going on, it's not going to get any better. So he may as well it's summer, some people will just turn out, and hopefully it's all about damage limitation. This is going to be an ex-Labour government for the next 4 or 5 years. What they do with it, best of luck. But the reality is that all the Tories have here is that, they have some great advantages, you would think, on education. Great stuff done. Net zero, they've reduced a lot of coal plant stuff. Unemployment is much lower than the rest of Europe. There are a lot of theoretical things you would think a government could lean on. They have actually practically zero to lean on. So the question is, go now and reduce the losses. Otherwise, they carry on for another 6 months, and there'll be nothing left for the Tory party.
What do we think is going to happen with all of those red wall voters, the former, diehard Labour voters that moved to the Tories in 2019? They turned out, we had this huge increase in voter turnout in the 26 Brexit referendum. They turned out for Boris Johnson in 2019. Where do they go?
Well, they must be so happy about the whole levelling up, the massive changes they've seen, the whole dramatic transformation of the north-south divide. I think they just, like the rest of us,
they just want to reward the Tories for all of that.
They don't vote, or they just vote for what they see.
Yeah.
What I worry about here is no democracy, low turnout. All I see is disgust and walk away from everything.
Yeah. Has the UK generally had a hard time with voter turnout?
Oh, normally about 70, mid 70%. So we're normally quite good.
I mean, compared to the US, this is a country that likes to exercise its
But older
civic
people
right.
really
They
vote.
do.
And the youth vote normally doesn't turn out.
Yeah.
I think that's the great dynamic. You know, we saw that with the whole Corbyn thing in 2017, which then in 2019 didn't turn up. The reason why Theresa May, failed is because the youth did turn up, but in 2019 they didn't again. They lost interest, and so that's why Boris won so convincingly. So again, it's both the youth quake and equally, do the pensioners bother to turn up and vote? And I don't know how that works, but really what Starmer needs to do is energize the youth to actually say, yes, come vote Labour, get rid of this Tory government. And the very smart voting we're starting to see in local elections, particularly with Liberal Democrats voting Labour and Labour voting Liberal Democrat to get the Tory out. Yeah. I think that's going to be the big story here for the 2024 election, plus the fact that Labour's going to smash the SNP in Scotland, probably, which means there'll be a big majority. The Democrats will win the Southwest, take back those 2015 seats that they lost to Cameron. And so we have the Tories killed on all angles. And that's where I see the 200 mark. If they can replace what Labour has now, they'll be very lucky.
So we know it's looking dire for Tories. Do we know what the current standings are in the polls? How far behind are they?
Yeah, I think the last one I looked at had Labour 27 points ahead. That was the YouGov poll. I mean, it's been
consistently 20 plus.
It's been above 20 percentage points for a good 6 months at least, probably longer.
That'll contract, but we're talking like it's still going to be high teens.
Yeah.
So the way the first past the post system works in the UK, it's one of these things which a lot of people don't understand how it works, but it's very favourable if you're winning. And there's a biased advantage to the Tories the way that they've shifted the boundaries now. Really, Labour has to have at least a 10 percentage point vote majority to really swing all the seats. But when you get to above, say, 15-20%, it swings so massively to their favour that the Tories actually end up losing out. And you'll see them losing to the Liberal Democrats in lots of seats, and you'll see them. So, as I said, it really could be a wipeout. There is a real potential.
How much of a factor is the Reform Party in this, do you think?
Zero. But obviously, Therese, what do you think?
See, I think Reform punches above its voter sort of weight in the sense that it has this power to kind of push the Tory party in a direction that I'd say centrist Tories would be uncomfortable with. So, I mean, beyond the result of this election, there's a fight for the heart of the Conservative Party, which, is really an agglomeration. I mean, all parties are broad tents, especially in a country with a two-party system. They all have different groupings. The Tory Party, has long been quite tribal. Those tribes, as our colleague Adrian Wooldridge has written, can be quite distinctive. They can also be overlapping on certain issues. And, Reform, to the extent that they, had a little bit of success in a few local election seats, but depending on how vocal they are, could push the Tory party more to the right. I think that would be to the detriment of the country as a whole if they become a more sort of, Hungarian, so Viktor Orban style party. There's been talks about trying to bring Nigel Farage into the Tory party, trying to broaden the tent further. So, I mean, I think a really, big question really post-election is what happens to the Conservatives? How do they digest the last year, 2 years, and what do they want to become as a party?
Yeah. Before we get to post-election, though, so we have 6 weeks, right, until an election happens. This will be my first UK general election. So what should we expect? What is going to happen over the next 6 weeks? When will manifestos come out? Tell me what to anticipate.
Well, in lots of ways, the campaigning's already started. We've just seen speech after speech in the last couple of weeks. Sunak, Angela Rayner, Mel Stride, they've been talking, everything on from security to housing. So, British election campaigns are wonderful because they're so short and they're compressed, and, you get it all over with in a short period of time, whereas US election campaigns drag on and on. I think they can be unpredictable, as we saw in 2017, where Theresa May called an election. Again, she didn't have to. I mean, obviously, Rishi Sunak has to call an election this year. Theresa May didn't. It did not end well for her. She proved to be a terrible campaigner. Jeremy Corbyn, really surprised everyone with how well he campaigned, and the Tories did very poorly in that election. So I doubt we're going to have that kind of surprise here, but we haven't really seen Starmer in that kind of campaign mode. So I think maybe there's a little bit of, question mark there, sort of how will he do day in and day out. And same with Rishi, because he's not, we haven't seen him on that sort of national stage. So, you get a magnifying glass on both the candidates, and that can produce some, some warts.
Matthew, I'm fascinated to know, you stepped away. What do you think of these characters?
I don't think either of them come across to me as being natural campaigners, or obviously people who've got a flair for this kind of thing, in the way that Tony Blair obviously did. I think Cameron does as well. I mean, he's a very fluent, articulate speaker who kind of seems to know intuitively how to present himself. To appear kind of convincing character. I mean, I just think if Cameron had been delivering that speech outside on Downing Street this afternoon, would he have really been standing there in the rain? It's like maybe I guess you have an army of advisors who think about these kind of things all the time, but it still seems illustrative to me.
But Rishi's sincere, though. That's the whole point about him. He really wants it. He's really, as is Keir Starmer. They're both completely different types of people. They're not. I think Cameron was
both quite
very
earnest.
Slick guy. Yeah, they're earnest. Yeah, very good question.
What about Ed Davey?
Ed Davey?
I think it's also.
What did you say?
It's also his first.
Ed who?
It's also his first time leading a party into a general election. I learned that on BBC Today.
It's the whole point is that can Keir Starmer become a human being, because he's Keir, he's the wooden, barrister, this prosecutor, against this technocrat, tech bro type hedge fund guy that Rishi is. Rishi is very earnest. He really is. I think he's been a superb Prime Minister. He's completely saved the ship the last 18 months. It's irrelevant because his party is falling about behind him. Bless him. He's obviously realised he's got to go now. He has been advised that if you hang on to November, there will be nothing left. So
I agree with Marcus. I think that the irony here is that for the first time in years, certainly since the 2016 referendum, this is actually a government that has a certain coherence. They have heavy hitters in the right places. Hunt has been, very competent as Chancellor of the Exchequer, also a good communicator, clear in terms of how he communicates to markets. And David Cameron has done a lot to restore Britain's standing in the Foreign Office. So, it is an irony, but the party has really run out of time. It's been 14 years. And, I think the thing that sticks in the craw of many of the public is just the number of scandals over time. And it just, every time you get a period of sort of, without a scandal, just another one comes up. And it's just a reminder of how much, kind of mismanagement there has been over those years. And some of it is, institutional, some of it dates back to Labour years as well and can't just be pinned on the Tories. Some of it's failed leadership, some of it's, You know,
And
yeah.
I tell you something, Therese. The one thing that Rishi Sunak will have is at least he had the elegance to go early, unlike Gordon Brown. He's realised this, that his epitaph, what do you want to call it, will be, yeah, I try my best. I settled the ship after, you know, obviously Liz Truss's X and Y and Z, and I've gone and I haven't tried to hang on for an extra 8-9 months, whatever it is. That is his epitaph. He's done really well, best he could.
Hmm.
He's got out of the way.
In contrast to Boris Johnson, who held on for dear life. He had to be pried out of number 10, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's one thing to hang on.
So this does sound like Labour's to lose, but what are some of the, like, how should they be pitching themselves to voters? Like, yes, there's Starmer being more personable, but what are the main issues right now that voters care about that they should be campaigning on?
Well, I mean, I'll just answer quickly. I think Labour is going to be very disciplined about this campaign. I think they're going to try to avoid as much as possible being very specific about what they're going to do. They're going to say we need to look at the books, which is complete, you know, bull SH1T, as Marcus said, because they can see exactly where, you know, where things are and how bad the situation facing the Treasury is. But they are not going to want to make their pledges you know, ones that they'll have to immediately row back on. And it's just going to be a very disciplined campaign. They will have to have a manifesto.
They don't have to say anything.
They don't have to say much, yeah.
Well, surely they have to put something, if they have to make some kind of concrete commitments in the manifesto, really.
They will, yeah. Like housing is a big one. They've already made commitments to build, was it 1 point?
Those 6 plastic pledges they put. I mean, plastic pledge pin of, you know, I don't know what they said. I can't even recite it myself, nor can the rest of the Labour cabinet, but the shadow cabinet. But they've already put their manifesto out, which is a lot of meaningless statements. They have to precisely nothing. And the one thing I will say about Starmer, he's ruthless, he is consistent, and he's detailed. And the people he has behind him are world class. They have destroyed a very poor Tory machine. They've destroyed them. And you've got Sue Gray behind him as chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney as running the political side. They are going to eviscerate the Tory non-campaign. It's the question of, do they tell anyone anything about what they really are going to do in power? And the practical reality is, as we've seen with the post office and the blood situation now, there are massive incoming problems. And would they have, good luck is they've got a probable lots of rate cuts coming, inflation is down, the growth is starting to get back up again, but bar that, they have a very large fiscal. Rachel Reeves has got a lot of heavy lifting to do. Personally, I think they're going to do lots of quite difficult things on pensions and wealth taxes, and there's going to be an awful lot coming. Do they reveal them before the election? If I was Morgan McSweeney or Sue Gray, I would be advising Keir Starmer, do precisely nothing. Don't interrupt your enemy while they're making a mistake.
Matthew, you
sure, I agree with that entirely. I mean, they've got no incentive to take risks whatsoever. I mean, they're 4-0 up in the last 10 minutes. You know, all they need to do is not self-destruct. So I agree. I don't. I'm not familiar enough with the rules of the road on manifestos and in elections, if there are. I mean, it just seems to me that you cannot go to the electorate without some kind of concrete proposition of this is what we intend to do in government.
I think that's right. They will try. They will put out something, and it will be costed, because that was something that Keir Starmer is quite keen to show, that they don't simply make promises, but they actually cost them. And I think they'll want the markets to be reassured that this is not a party that, you know, this is not the profligate sort of more socialist party of the past. They're going to want to really show seriousness. But I think really the key conversations are the ones that we're not going to be privy to. They happen behind the scenes and with the different parts of the Labour Party. We talked about Tory tribes. The Labour Party has their own, you know, tribal landscape, and there will be some pretty interesting discussions on workers' rights, for example. And I think there's a lot that will only come out after the election in terms of what policies Starmer signs up for that will cost, may end up costing the economy. So, those may not be in the manifesto.
No, Therese, the real big open goal here is housing, it's planning. If they can sort out planning and build, and just get rid of.
And that's what they promised too. That was the big offer at the Labour Party conference in the autumn, if you remember, was on housing and on planning. But so the Tories have also at times said that they will clear the planning obstacles, and it's not been done yet. So we'd like to see it happen.
They want a second term. The whole point about Starmer's is they want a second term. If they can sort housing out, then they've got an open shot at 10 years in power. But you're absolutely right. The big battle will be workers' rights. Is that the big thing that business is really worried about? Other than that, they love Rachel Reeves, but she gives them what they think that they want. The brutal reality is probably a Labour government, I have to be very careful here, might be very good news for markets. We could have a happy stock market, a happy bond market with Bank of England cutting interest rates. Sterling could hold up here. If we can get some consensus in Europe, a sense that the psychodrama of the last 5 years, at least, is over, Labour could be good news. The one big risk is, I think you spotted that exactly, is the labour laws. If they introduce much more, should we say, beneficial to workers' rights, which business doesn't like, that could be the big upset of an early start to a Labour government.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about Europe yet, but the Labour, I think, is going to be very quick at shutting down any questions about rejoining the European Union. They don't want to spook voters on that, but what they will say is that we can improve on existing trade relations. That the reality is they can't improve much on it. They can do certain things on the margins, worker mobility, professional, recognition of professional qualifications and that kind of thing. They don't want us back. That's also true. But there is a review of the TCA, the Trade Cooperation Agreement, coming up. It's really meant to be a kind of technocratic thing that happens to look at what parts of the agreement are working and not working. It's not meant to be a massive renegotiation, but I think depending on how Starmer feels, they will look to that review to try to just sort of move things a bit closer. We won't be talking about rejoining the customs union or the single market unless there's a second Labour term. And then I think, maybe that we'll again get a Brexit election. This is the first non-Brexit election we've had since 2015. So, I think we should all at least relish that aspect of this political event.
Yeah. Well, I think we're running out of time, so we'll end. I imagine we're going to be talking a lot more maybe over the next 6 weeks, but maybe we'll end on what is something like each of you are hoping to see over the next 6 weeks from either Labour or Tories. Maybe Matthew, we can start with you.
Yeah, I'd just like to see a serious debate on the issues that matter rather than, populist mudslinging. And I don't expect that, Of course, that's absurdly optimistic, but yeah.
Good to be optimistic. Marcus, what about you?
Well, I grew up near Keir Starmer, and I know people who went to school with him, and I think I know who he is. But I'd like to see a little bit more who he really is. And that's the one thing must come out of this, because we've got a Prime Minister which says a lot of things which mean, so far, very little in common sense. It's really what he feels. If we can see the real Keir Starmer, we can bind us all and finally get over this for the last 10 years, then even I might support him. And I think he has a lot of promise. He's evidently a very intelligent guy. He's ruthless. I think he has a wonderful, and I don't mean this in a complimentary way, but a really successful, superb machine behind him. This guy is a killer. He's going to be very good at getting elected. He's done everything right. He's not missed a step. Can he actually, unlike Boris, who also got elected, just
it sounds like you've decided the result of the election already, Marcus. I mean, even the Economist gives the Tories a 1% chance of winning. It sounds like you're not even giving them that.
I defer to the polls, but whatever.
Good.
I think Rishi's been a fantastic prime minister for under a very difficult circumstances, with a party which is just obliterated around him, and a very difficult legacy. Practically speaking, I'd like to see. Actually, Rishi thinks he can do the next. I don't know what the next Tory government would do for the next 5 years. Tell me, anyone, what's Rishi going to do for the next 5 years? I don't know.
Yeah.
Equally, who is Keir Starmer, and what do you really think? Because I don't think we know anything about him. So I hope that in the next 6 weeks we get a clarity on those two things.
Yeah, we'll check in on it. And Therese, what about you? What are you hoping to see?
Yeah, so I feel we know, enough about Keir Starmer as a person. I'd like to see, I think the war in Ukraine is really the defining issue for Europe right now. I'd like to be convinced that Keir Starmer will put the investment into Britain's very, very, very needy armed forces to maintain the support for Ukraine and the Britain's role in the NATO alliance and its U.S. support. So that would be high on my list. On the economy, I'd like to see what their plans are on encouraging business investment, because I think if we can't get businesses to invest, we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle to get the economic growth and the productivity improvements that this economy badly needs. And the third thing, I'd really like to see a plan for skills for young people. I think we're really falling off a cliff in terms of training young people, not, the apprenticeships and that sort of thing. So that's one of my bugbears. I'd like to see a party that can really commit on those three things.
Keep wishing on all those, in particular last.
Marcus is having too much fun.
I think so. I think he's
These things are never going to happen in our million years.
Well, let's see. We'll come back. We'll check in with each other again. But in the meantime, thank you guys for making time to hop on. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Therese. Thank you, Marcus.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you all.